Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, March 5th. It is a little after 5:30 p.m. And this week started off with a bang, literally on the other side of the world.
And then it's still in our minds, really, like we did not really have much bandwidth to think about anything else. But let's get into it first. So just very briefly, for people who just don't follow news at all, what happened?
Well, some people in the United States Pentagon, who, as it turns out, might have some incel sort of vibes to them, decided to name the military operation Epic Freedom or whatever it is. Epic Fury, thank you. And the Israelis called theirs a Roaring Lion. And they decided to bomb the Iranian targets. And that was a bit of a surprise because, if we all remember last year when they bombed Iranian targets, Donald Trump said that Iranian nuclear facilities and sites were completely obliterated. And then just before launching those strikes, they said, well, the Iranians are now very close to acquiring nuclear weapons again. So I guess now the Iranians were really on meth, I guess. They were really moving really fast to build up their nuclear facilities. And so we've had bombings. And the Iranians responded, and they've been targeting their Gulf neighbors. They've been hitting Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and
It's U.S. forces.
well, the U.S. bases are there, but those missiles are flying into those countries anyway. And so they're all very happy about this.
Right. Just to make sure that John does not sound like Iranian leader, what was the reason for Israel to initiate that and then for U.S. to join and intervene?
First of all, I cannot sound like the Iranian leader because Ali Khamenei is dead and he's not making any noises anymore.
Okay.
What was the question? I don't remember what you're saying.
What was the concern from Israel that triggered the attack, the strike, and then U.S., what was the reason, justification for intervention?
Well, as far as Israel is concerned, Benjamin Netanyahu has been singing from the same hymn book for the past 20, 30 years. Iran is 2 weeks away from acquiring the nuclear weapons. And he's been saying that for 20, 30 years. And so Bibi Netanyahu finally got what he wanted. He got the green light from the Trump administration to start bombing Iranian targets. Now, why did Trump actually agree to this? Now, again, the officially given reason was that the Iranians are now very close to acquiring nuclear weapons. But is that true? Who knows? Maybe it's because he was pissed off about his tariffs being canceled by the Supreme Court. Maybe it's because he's worried about the midterm elections and he wants to rally the flag. There are many different kinds of reasons. But anyway, the publicly given reasons are about security.
Right. So the reason why we are walking through something that happened in Iran, which we usually don't do on this podcast unless it's like directly related to Korea, because it does have implications directly and indirectly.
It impacts everyone.
Right. So direct implication, we will get into it. I'll ask you. But the indirect one is this was a yet another moment where we see the calculations or like just decisions or hunches or whatever that's behind Trump's Department of War making decisions on things like that, right? And so from the allies' point of view or adversaries' point of view, this changed a lot of calculations on their end. About the direct impact, let's talk about the supply chain and the shipment, first of all. What was initial response from the South Korean government, and then what are the companies concerned right now?
Well, we just got out of cabinet meeting today.
I mean, not him directly, but
Yeah.
No, we were there directly. We were there personally.
Right. So the president convened and presided over a cabinet meeting. It was a sort of special cabinet meeting to respond to the effects of the Iran conflict on South Korea's socio-economic issues related to what's happening at the Hormuz Strait, what it happens to affect South Korea's shipping, oil reserves, whatnot. So the authorities, as of, I think, February 28th was when the strikes were happening. They're monitoring tanker routes, preparing contingency plans as the crisis threatens to shift into war of attrition and extend for weeks and months on end. So the cabinet meeting just saw him ordering a implementation of 100 trillion won, that's about $75 billion.
68, according to the latest FX numbers.
Right. And this is basically a financial stabilization program calling for emergency measures to curb these surging fuel prices as these Middle East tensions, Iranian retaliatory strikes on Gulf nations continue. So Lee was instructing his cabinet ministers basically to consider setting these temporary maximum gasoline prices, developing penalties for price gouging, which has been sort of a trend in recent days, and also urging the sort of strict action against this misinformation from the political right within the National Assembly, and also market manipulation, calling for these sort of accelerated efforts to shift South Korea towards that renewable energy that he's been calling for since his presidential campaign.
What are the companies concerned about this right now, South Korean companies?
Energy.
Energy?
That's what it comes down to. The Iranian Republican Guard Corps, the IRGC, they told everyone that if your ships come near the Hormuz Strait, we will shoot you down. Now, so far they have attacked, and I don't know if they sank it, but they attacked one oil tanker. Now, it was a Palau flagged ship, but apparently it belonged to Iran. So they bombed their own ship. But regardless, they bombed a ship. Now, what that means is that a lot of other tankers that carry all that black stuff, that oil that everyone needs, they're not going to be willing to move along that area. And that's because the insurance companies are not going to insure those ships. And that means that energy is just basically bottlenecked.
Yeah.
Now, as everyone knows, South Korea imports 90% of its energy. 70% of that comes from the Middle East. It has to travel from the Strait of Hormuz. It has to go all the way across the Indian Ocean, and then it has to pass the Strait of Malacca, move over to the South China Sea, and then arrive in South Korea. But if it gets stopped at the Strait of Hormuz, then South Korea is kind of out of luck. Now, of course, the South Koreans are saying we need to diversify our energy sources. We need to import from elsewhere, but they've been saying that for years, and they're still saying it now. Now they're saying we can import from the U.S. because of the Trump agreement, the tariff agreement that we had, because apparently that oil pipeline is going to be the answer to our prayers, the pipeline that does not exist. And also a slightly more realistic answer is, of course, Australia. It's right over there. But, it takes time to have these kinds of contracts. And South Korea, well, at least the government right now is saying that the country still has a lot of emergency reserves. But that really depends on how long this conflict lasts. Iran has thousands of ballistic missiles. It has the most missiles among any country in that region. Sure, the United States is going after their launchers and their TELs, but who knows how long this war is going to last.
So it sounds like you wrote in your analysis that it's a structural risk. It sounds like it might have been something that we sort of did not try to think about, but it's sort of right there. We have to handle now, it seems.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. To Junha, I had a question. Actually, it's more like a shared concern. Over the weekend when we saw the breaking news, Junha and I were DMing each other, and we were actually immediately our mind went to peninsula security as well. We're not saying Iran, Israel, and South Korea, North Korea are same, facing the same. It's absolutely different. There are different factors. China nearby, Russia nearby, the nuclear weapons are better, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to Donald Trump's decision to actually intervene and strike, it must have ruffled a lot of feathers in South Korean Defense Ministry and just defense experts. What are the main concerns when it comes to peninsula security?
Well, we just heard in the cabinet meeting this morning, President Lee was basically dismissing the idea of a similar attack as the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Tehran would happen to Pyongyang, for example. We saw some conservative lawmakers and conservative politicians, namely PPP Chang Dong-hyuk and An Cheol-soo, coming out saying that, this is a precursor to what's going to happen in North Korea. Kim Jong-un must be scared out of his shorts. But
that the U.S. will strike North Korea?
Yes, they were alluding to that, and also basically stated that during a sort of Supreme Council meeting just days after the strike happened. But Lee, he came out just after a briefing from his defense minister on the safety of ROK troops in the Middle East, that talk like this should be dismissed, and that his cabinet ministers and authorities should work to allay the public concern and sort of the public discourse on whether a similar strike could happen to Pyongyang.
Right. I would say that it's somewhere in between. It's not as batshit crazy as what Chang Dong-hyuk is saying, but it has a point. When it comes to concerns, there is a point, because it does not have to be asked for as immediate strike or anything. But we already saw in Wall Street Journal exclusive earlier that the United States attempted gathering intel from the North Korean coast, and they ended up killing a bunch of civilians there, right? So something like this could happen, but I think the cabinet's point is that don't do the fear mongering, right?
Right.
But
So,
also, when I saw Foreign Minister Choi Hyun's remarks earlier that, looking at the Iran situation, maybe North Korea now realizes that, no nuclear sort of negotiation is needed from their end. I'm like, what is he smoking?
well, you can't
I thought
really.
drugs were illegal.
I
What's
thought
he
so
on?
too. Yeah.
The South Korean foreign ministry has always been tending
On drugs?
to over-exaggerate their
Okay.
role on the Korean Peninsula as the sort of pacemaker that they're going for.
Mhm.
So it's not really a surprise of
Or
what
maybe
Cho
it's not
Hyun's
his
saying.
fault, right? He
I
was
think
probably
he's a
instructed to say
spokesperson
that.
for the government.
Let's move on to domestic. There was a cabinet meeting, including passing what's called 사법 3법, the three laws related to reforming the judiciary in South Korea. Let's not go into all three of them, but I think the most important one is the number of judges thing, right?
Right. So the DP and the president was campaigning on this during the presidential elections last June. They were looking to increase the number of judges on the Supreme Court bench. Partly, mainly just due to the reason that came out of the Yoon administration and also their claims that the previous administration and the judicial system were targeting Lee Jae Myung as a political individual for his numerous legal cases that are still ongoing. So they're just moving forward to deliver that rationale in a legal form.
And something not really related to domestic politics, but it's years in making. The Google Maps related news this week was pretty big. What happened?
Well, after 19 years, the South Korean government finally allowed Google to export high-definition maps. This was a very long and contentious issue. The South Korean government's position has always been that it had to restrict the export of such data because of security issues. They always said North Korea, because, the North Koreans apparently don't know where the Blue House is located. But that's always been the South Korean government's position, that in order to ensure that the data is secure, Google has to build a data center in South Korea. Now, Google never wanted to do this, of course, because yes, Google makes a lot of money in South Korea through YouTube and all of its other revenue streams. But the moment it has a physical AI data center in South Korea, that's when it starts to get taxed by Korean tax laws. And so Google never wanted to do this. And so why did South Korea finally relent? Well, two reasons: Section 122 and Section 301. Now, Section 122 is that new tariff that Donald Trump is using to impose a 15% levy on all countries. Now, this is a 150-day limit, but whatever, it's right now 50% for every country. But Section 301 is where the U.S. Trade Representative's Office is able to look at particular cases where they focus on discrimination against U.S. companies. Now, U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer has always had his eye on South Korea's domestic laws, like the anti-platform monopoly laws and
Digital Act.
the Digital Act as well. And they've always been saying the Washington's position, especially under Greer, has been that these are non-tariff barriers, and that this would be the sort
What
of
even
thing.
does that mean? But
It can mean whatever people want it to mean.
yeah.
And so, if the South Korea comes under this Section 301 investigation, that means the tariffs will go up even more. And because we've seen how trigger happy the Trump administration is when it comes to any kinds of tariffs, this is not the time when South Korea wants to scratch Donald Trump the wrong way. And we have to keep in mind that when it comes to digital data maps, this is not South Korea's bread and butter. South Korea's bread and butter is semiconductors, EV batteries. These are the things that South Korea really needs to sell. But if Donald Trump says, because of these non-tariff barriers on U.S. technology, we're going to impose tariffs on South Korea, that's a really bad game that South Korea has to play. So South Korea finally said, okay, now it is still provisional. Google needs a local partner in South Korea in order to export those maps. So there is going to be an added layer and some delays, but eventually Google kind of won, I guess.
What about the security aspect of all of this? Because as far as I know, the reason why Google Map had such an issue in South Korea and the reason that South Korean government always gave was that, well, we are technically still at war. So certain geolocation information are supposed to not be so public.
And this is part of that whole provisional permit sort of thing. So there are going to be limits as to what they can export. Chad, our boss, he's not going to be able to use Google Maps in South Korea even as freely as anywhere else. Yes, there will be some more features available in Google Maps than before, to the same extent as you would be able to use in, say, Sacramento. No, that's not going to happen. And that's where the local partner comes in. So this is how South Korea is trying to save face, basically. That they are still saying that we are still concerned about security.
So hypothetically, if you're driving past Kaedongdae or something, the limitation will still be there.
I'm not quite sure how much of the limitations is going to be there. This will really have to come down to practice.
I see. And speaking of U.S. and South Korea related long-time conflict, I have to discuss the General Brunson statement quickly. We did not really touch on news aspects last week, but this was a big news. Basically, what happened was U.S. was conducting a aerial drill, somewhere between Cadiz and the China.
Cadiz.
Is that how it's called? Cadiz and Cadiz.
There's no H in
That's what I'm saying.
C-A-D-I-Z, K-A-D-I-Z, Cadiz.
Anyways, they were doing the drills there, and then Chinese jets scrambled in response. And the report that came out after that was that South Korean defense minister complained and that General Brunson apologized.
Supposedly.
They said, but a couple hours later, in a very rare timing where we see USFK statement late at night, right?
Very late.
Brunson issued a statement, or more like USFK issued a statement saying, well, we don't apologize for our readiness posture.
They said they expressed regret that the South Korean authorities got the message late.
So this is a Diplo speak of saying basically...
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, it's like as far as the rhetoric goes, if you really want to swear at someone, but you have to do it via statement.
I don't know if this is true, but apparently that statement that USFK made was actually issued by the very top in the Pentagon, meaning Pete Hegseth.
So that was also a report.
Yes,
right?
Not sure if it's true.
Right, but it's reasonable. But looking at all this, and then there was like a pushback, and then local media was saying all sorts of things about it's like they're not ironclad anymore and blah blah blah. But the broader context is from South Korea's point of view, they likely saw it as a breach of what the South Korean and U.S. side agreed decades back on the strategic flexibility when it comes to China, Taiwan, and other issues related to U.S.-China. So it's basically the agreement in the past between U.S. and South Korea that U.S. Can do whatever it wants, kind of, with the USFK there, but they won't let South Korea get dragged into a conflict between U.S. and someone else, right? So South Korea's position was that it was breached. But U.S. side position was not that, right?
No, U.S. was basically saying that they were following their defense agenda. They were just going ahead with what these drills were planned to do, which was just defense readiness against emerging threats in the region. There was nothing really much to suggest that the U.S. was, trekking back and saying that, we apologize for the stuff, as you mentioned, that Brunson completely denied his apologies to the South Korean defense minister and the South Korean JCS chairman. It's worthy to note that even if it is an air defense identification zone, even if they were operating in between those zones, if you are an allied
which is
nation,
international waters technically, right?
Indeed, but if you are operating from a host nation base, let's say that as USFK does and operates from Camp Humphreys, those sorties would have flown from there.
And South Korea's position is that then the base can be the target.
Yes, and also they need to be notified in advance.
I see.
Clearly on the objective of the mission, on the objective of what their flight will entail. But from the South Korean perspective, that was left out.
I see.
Now, regarding the statement itself, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Brunson did apologize, but later on, the statement was changed to offering the regrets that we just talked about. Now, let's say that Brunson did apologize. Who leaked that apology and why? That does not sound like the kind of thing that you should be leaking to the media between these top-level commanders, between the South Korean and U.S. defense ministries.
Or exactly something that you would love to leak if your goal is to show the public that you are doing your job against friends that are being a bully.
Well, the first reports that came out of that apology were citing South Korean authorities. So, it
like
puts
an
a lot
anonymized
of,
high-level official.
Indeed, from
right?
the defense ministry as well.
And let's say another hypothesis, he did not apologize, but someone decided, oh, I take that as an apology and leaked it. What was the probable reasoning behind that? Probably the same reasoning. Anyways, it's something to keep an eye on whether or not this is like a one-off episode or this sort of 신경전. What's 신경전?
Psychological warfare?
Yeah, ish. Or whatever goes on. Week ahead, let's start with domestic politics. 공천's going on. What's 공천, Jenna?
Right, so it's effectively just applications being put in for the party primaries for specific mayoral and governor positions. These provincial mayor and governor positions for the local elections is coming up on June 3rd. So the PPP and the DP have started these primary application take-ins. I believe the DP has already finalized its candidates for the Gangwon, Incheon, and the Gyeongnam. So the South Gyeongsang province region, just picking basically just the biggest names. Sang Ho, the former presidential office public relations officer. You also have Park Chan-dae, the former floor leader of the DP.
Familiar name.
Yeah, and Kim Kyung-soo, who...
Also familiar name.
Also familiar name.
All the old gang.
Yeah,
The
old
guy
gang
who was
coming
in jail,
together. Yeah,
right?
the guy who was in jail for election law violation, but is running for an election again.
No irony lost there. On industrial news next week, the SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won will attend the NVIDIA's annual technology conference called the GTC 2026. This is where NVIDIA sometimes, actually bring the actual model of the stuff like HBM to the stage and sort of get this standing ovation and everything.
Jensen Huang loves to be theatrical.
He's actually very good at it and he likes doing it. So he's going there to the United States, and this is the first reunion between the two after the CHIMEC meeting, including the Samsung chairman back in South Korea.
Another thing that we'll have to look forward to is what the president just said today about possible price gouging and maximum prices of fuel. Now, I wish I could just tell the president to shut the hell up when it comes to maximum or minimum prices of anything, because that never ends well. But yeah, the president said it, so that might lead into some sort of a policy initiative in the coming weeks.
And the petroleum industry will be keeping a close eye on whether they can find alternative supplies after the Hormuz closure, it seems.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah. Busy week.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inbox by Monday at 2 p.m. by the Weekend Newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.